Good morning, everyone. Ayushi has already done the job of introducing us so well, but I am Sashwati Mishra. I am a Senior Research Associate at Good Business Lab, and today we're presenting a paper that's titled Misinformation and Anxiety, Evidence from a Randomized COVID-19 Information Campaign. I'm doing this along with Varun Chati. So this paper was originally authored by Sadish Thakal, who's an ex-senior research manager at Good Business Lab, and founders and professors Achita and Anant. Just to give you some background on the study, it was a randomized control trial that was conducted with migrant factory workers who hailed from Orissa and were either presently working or had in the past worked in Shahi garment factories all across Karnataka. The reason we choose this sample is twofold. First, one, we realized that there were studies by people like Mubarak who talk about how, because of the migrant exodus that happened during the pandemic, migrants were more susceptible to be vectors of the disease because either they poorly complied with the safety guidelines, or two, they did not have enough information regarding the safety guidelines. Another thing was that the manufacturing sector did not shut shop during the pandemic, which meant that considering how large scale the employment in these production units are, they were more susceptible to be fast spreaders of the disease. And hence, like, providing information to the workers in such units becomes even more important. So the question we try to investigate using this study is, can we broadcast information in such a way that improves the retention of the information without any negative consequences to mental health? And we'll tell you why. The key findings of the paper, which again we'll elaborate later on, were that receiving information via phone calls compared to receiving the same information via voice recordings or text messages improved the retention of the information by the end line. It also, people were more likely to hear the information when received via a phone call by a real person, and it had the least negative consequences on the mental health of the person receiving this information. Let's look at some of the literature surrounding misinformation and anxiety. And papers like Burston et al. Talk about how misinformation, or like fake news, when spread through mass media modes like television programs in the US, and this was specifically during the COVID-19, was highly correlated with high rates of infections and deaths. Information, whether fake or not, can also be anxiety-inducing, right? And papers like Holman and Thompson talk about how, especially during the COVID-19, people were more likely to agree to having higher anxiety or disorders, and they reported acute stress. So understanding that information can create anxiety, and anxiety, on the other hand, can lead to impaired cognitive functions, because something like the working memory capacity is highly dependent on the person's mental well-being. So considering that anxiety in turn affects your working memory capacity can in turn lead to impaired cognitive functions and hence poor decision-making. So all in all, anxiety or having a sad state of your mental health can result in, one, poor compliance with the safety measures that you will take in during the pandemic, or two, even process the information the right way. Thank you. So just to reiterate, the question we then try to identify is which information broadcast method is better at delivering information in order to maintain retention of the information, and at the same time has the least negative impact on your mental health. So the study was conducted in June 2020, and as the infographic shows, we started with 914 respondents at baseline, and there were three treatments. One was whether the information was delivered via SMS, or the other two, which was whether they were delivered by a real person over a phone call or a voice recording. And the random selection was such that 20% of the sample was randomly selected into receiving the information via SMS, and 40% each was chosen into whether they received the information via phone calls or voice recordings. Now, by the end line, we see about an 18% attrition in the sample that we started off with. And we also did realize that the attrition was imbalanced on the baseline characteristics and the treatment assignment, because of which we do something called the inverse probability weighting. And the treatment effects that we talk about later in the presentation have been weighted accordingly. So just as an understanding of how the intervention or the study panned out, like I said, the study started in June 2020, and it was done in phased-in manner such that multiple strata were surveyed in one day, but like this continued for a few days. So somebody receiving their baseline survey on day 0 would get the intervention in a couple of days of receiving the baseline, and then the end line was conducted in 3 to 4 weeks post the baseline. Now, this is just to remind the audience that all of this was conducted over the phone, which means that all the 3 modes of intervention, so like text messages and voice recordings, since they are easier to attempt at, we use something called Exotel to automate people receiving their text messages or voice recordings. And this was mostly like successful in one attempt of trying to send this information across. But for somebody to be available over a phone call to talk to a real person, we had to reach up to about 8 attempts sometimes to provide the intervention. So this is just an example slide of what the intervention script was. I mean, the information that was delivered through the 3 different modes: text messages, audio recordings, and phone calls. And as you can see, this was, this is the English version, but this was all translated in Odia because we were talking to migrant workers who hailed from Orissa. So these were basically 7 information pointers that were delivered as a script. And for example, the first pointer talks about the symptoms of COVID, right? And just to inform the audience again, since the study was done in June 2020, WHO had guidelines around factual information around COVID. And this meant that we were able to fact check all of this before we provided this information to our respondents or our sample. So this is in comparison to when the pandemic hit us in Feb 2020, when WHO did not have exact guidelines back then. So we used the WHO guidelines for our factual correctness of our script. So there were 2 outcomes of interest for us in the study. One was the mental health, which we measured using 2 items from the patient health questionnaire, which measures depression, and 2 items from the general anxiety disorder scale, which measures anxiety. The other outcome was knowledge, which was we created a normalized index, which was a sum of 15 items in total, 9 of which indicated whether a person knew about the symptoms of COVID, and 6 others were these ternary variables that indicated general information about COVID. So they've been listed here. I can just read out the first one. If someone does not show any symptoms of the novel coronavirus, could they still have the disease? Now, mind you, the response, so they were not exactly the same, they were not coded the same way. Like each of the question was coded according to the factual correctness of the statement made. So we estimate 2 equations, or like a version of these 2 equations. The first one is an ANCOVA estimate, where call I is an indicator of whether somebody received the phone call treatment and the effect of that on the outcome. The reason we compare phone call treatments versus either voice recordings or SMS is because we thought of a logical pooling of the treatment arms, and according to our understanding, text messages or voice recordings are an impersonal way of providing the information compared to providing the information over a phone call by a real person. So that's the first equation for you. The second equation, before I jump into it, so in the surveys that we conducted for our respondents, we also asked them, we actually calculated their short-term memory using a universal number recall test. And we wanted to look for or like control for any heterogeneity effects. And For that, we also calculated something called the numeracy score, which is a sum of 3 basic arithmetic questions that are asked to the respondents. So the second equation that you see is just to control for any heterogeneity. MI here is an indicator of whether somebody had an above medium short-term memory or an above median numeracy score, or whether they owned a smartphone. So what we tried to do here was to just test whether these 3 things, either having a above median short-term memory, which sort of translates into your working memory capacity, or your numeracy score, or having a smartphone, if that moderates the effect that phone call treatment can have on the outcomes. I think I just stop here, and I would like Varun to take over, where he talks about the descriptive statistics and results from the study. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, let me now walk you all through some descriptive characteristics of our sample at the baseline. We had a good gender balance with about 57% women. The mean age of our sample is about 24 years, and a third of the sample was educated above the 10th grade level. 18% of our sample iterated between baseline and endline. In terms of COVID-19 knowledge, a third of the sample didn't mention cough as a symptom, about half didn't mention fever, and about a quarter recommend symptomatic individuals take antibiotics. Now, it's important to situate this kind of in the context of the time that we're talking about. There was a lot of information going on, and these are actually pretty shocking statistics, because half of the people not knowing that fever is a symptom of COVID is, I mean, it was a very big deal. We had Amitabh Bachchan delivering messages on the phone and everything. About a tenth of our sample recommended cow's urine as a solution to COVID. A third believed that turmeric was a protective measure, and about a fifth of the sample actually thought religion plays a serious role in the spread of COVID. Let me quickly now take you through our information delivery. So while you can see here that a larger share of the people in the voice recording arm answer the phone as compared to the phone call arm, live calls were more engaging. We see that those in the phone call arm stayed on the call longer, they were more likely to listen to the full message, and they asked to repeat the information more often. I want to caveat that while, like Sashwati said, while text messages were delivered predominantly in one attempt, we took 8 attempts over 2 days to deliver information via phone calls and voice recordings. Let me now tell you a little bit about our results. I'm going to draw your attention to columns 4 and 8. So columns 4 and 8 are the strictest specifications that we run, controlling for all the fixed effects, for inverse probability weights, for control variables, as well as information content on our major outcomes of interest. In column 8, you'll see that the phone call arm saw a reduction of about half a standard deviation in depression and anxiety from PHQ-4. This effect is larger on anxiety than it is on depression, with moderate to severe anxiety reduced by about 28%. We also see about a 0.04 standard deviation reduction in knowledge, increase in knowledge of participants that receive live phone calls. This effect was more pronounced for participants without smartphones, who saw an 18% of standard deviation increase in the same. So in conclusion, text and recorded audio messages dominated information campaigns targeting those without access to internet, according to the International Telecommunication Union and the World Health Organization. However, our study demonstrates that phone calls actually have better consequences for mental health, while being at least as effective as the other methods and costing the same at least as recorded audio messages. Our thoughts are that some policy implications of this could be that results from this study could be used to design large-scale information dissemination strategies that simultaneously want to improve mental health outcomes. The results of these can be generalized for low-income internal migrants in India and similar demographics. I would say these results are especially relevant given the current situation. With the second wave, there is an overload of information about the new COVID strains, about vaccine efficacy, about restrictions, and all of these can be anxiety inducing and could potentially benefit from the results of our study.
Great. Thank you so much for that really interesting presentation, Sashwati and Varun. And we can now take questions from the audience. And please feel free to unmute yourself and ask your questions, or you can also drop in your questions in the chat box here. Okay, maybe I can begin by asking one question that I had. And for me, what was really interesting is that the statistics on phone call that you mentioned, the 37% sample group. And I was wondering whether these phone calls were more dialogue based or were they more one-way communication, and what your thought would be on which might be better to as a way of disseminating that information among these migrant populations, and especially specific to the sample population that you had selected.
I can take that, Varun. Thanks for asking this, Ayushi, because it is a very big part of designing the arms. And something that we made sure we did was the phone call intervention and the voice recordings only differed by the fact that a real person was delivering them, delivering the former versus the latter. The script was the exact same. We also made sure that when the script was spoken, it was timed to match exactly the voice recording. And we also discouraged our enumerator who was providing this information via phone call to not engage in any other discussions beyond providing the script or repeating the information on the script. So those were the two things that we wanted them to do. And this was just done to not bring in any other additional, differences between the treatments beyond the fact that it was a real person versus an automated sound. So even the automated message was actually recorded for the exact same person who delivered the phone call to. And the idea was just to differentiate them between the only differentiation had to be that this was a real person delivering it, even though the person was the exact same in both the arms.
We have another question from Shomit, and he's asking, slightly tangential to your study, any insights on the nature of factual information that cause more anxiety as opposed to pacifying it? And if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask a follow-up to that, please feel free to do so.
I can just give you something as simple as the study on fatalism. I think it's by Kerwin. I can provide this later on. But this is just literature on how any information that I think, in our study, people were more willing to know the information because they were unaware and they were more likely to hear it. But anxiety inducing can have two results, right? Fatalism tells you that if we give too many death statistics to someone, they're more likely to not give a damn, as simply put, and people just stop wanting to comply to any safety measures if told that something is extremely like for example, COVID-19 requires you to have social distancing, otherwise you're more likely to contract it and things could get more severe if you're comorbid. Now, if we start giving statistics to people about how crazy the death numbers are or how crazy your possibility of getting it is, they're more likely to either get extremely worried and probably take into account this information and do something about it, which means that they social distance or not go out or whatever. But it could also result in people not caring absolutely at all and going on and doing it, because them doing something about it doesn't reduce their chances of whether they not do something about it either. So I don't know if there is a very specific information, but there are these like varieties of literature that talk about how even anxiety inducing information can be taken to two extreme levels of decision making and behavioral aspects of it. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I was the one who asked the question. So I was wondering if your study majorly looked at just the medium of information, or did you also look at variables in terms of phrasing and the kind of content that's provided and things like that?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and we did, because especially the fact that it's such a subjective intervention, right? We could be providing a myriad of information. Why choose only these? If you look at the 6 ternary questions, not all of them are factually accurate. Like we took a good mix of things that provide factual accuracy versus things that are questionable. For example, does cow urine help with improving your chances of not contracting COVID-19, or does it improve your health if you have COVID? So something like that versus a question like, if somebody is asymptomatic, could they still have COVID-19? So the idea was to understand what kind of information gets retained better. Because in our script, we do give people information on how turmeric or cow urine does not, for example, turmeric has health benefits, but it is not confirmed that it's supposed to help with, reducing your symptoms if you have COVID-19 or something like that. So we try to be careful in understanding what kind of information gets retained and how much are we able to combat any kind of misinformation that might exist. And that's why we chose like a pool of things that we asked them about. For example, so the questions were a mix of questions that have factual correctness to them versus things that are questionable. And in the script also, we accordingly provide the information depending on the kind of questions that people were able to answer or not. So we did like extensive pre-pilot studies on things that people knew about and things people didn't, and what kind of measures people were generally taking. So we had to understand the context first before we could decide which beliefs we were supposed to, we wanted to question versus which we did not. Also, we should be conclusive. We had to make sure that we followed the WHO guidelines. So we couldn't be vague about what our choice of beliefs were.
Yeah, thank you.
I can just chime in here. If your question was specifically about did we vary information phrasing across arms and use that as kind of a part of the treatment, then we didn't. We did a lot of pre-work and settled on a set of information guidelines that we were to disseminate, and we only varied the dissemination method in the actual RCT.
All right, yeah, thank you. I have one more follow-up if there's no one else who's been waiting. Yeah, so I was, in terms of policy implications, I was just wondering if you could summarize a little more if right now someone's looking at dissemination of information, like it's mentioned here, there's already, a huge clutter of information, right? So are there any key aspects to keep in mind when there is a dissemination of information that's being designed, especially for the sector that you were looking at? Or is that out of the scope of what you guys looked at?
I'm not sure we can speak to if other organizations are really looking at this, but I would say what is to be looked at is, or what our study specifically says is pertinent to what you said, is that in terms of dissemination strategy, phone calls help. Text messages and voice recordings are the norm, but phone calls help a little more, especially when it comes to mental health outcomes. So, but in terms of, like I said, phrasing, etc., I don't think we can speak very much to that.
I just want to add in one more thing, that considering our results relied heavily on the fact that a real person was providing this information, I think a key aspect to disseminating this information has to come from the fact that the workers are willing to listen to somebody who's voicing or who's providing them this information. So in that sense, we did want to bring into the idea of how companies or organizations, when they are sensitizing their workers, they need to take in somebody who's personally connected to these people, so that one, it eases them in understanding this information, and also I think we can hope for better mental health outcomes out of people getting this information out of somebody more reliable, even within the organization. There's one more question. Can I just read it? Ayushi? Yeah. So they say you said the effects were different for anxiety and depression. What was the difference? Varun, is there any specific statistic that you want to show? I think this is just to understand that we sort of pool it together. We don't exactly look at anxiety and depression separately, because these scales are, again, extremely subjective and specific to population. So we do use the whole PHQ-4 as a bundle in total to understand the effect on mental health, and not just specifically on anxiety and depression. Varun, do you want to add something to that?
Sure. So if the question is about what is the difference between depression and anxiety, subjectively, let's say depression is more like a sinking feeling and something more associated with the past. Anxiety is more kind of stress about the future. This is, of course, a very, very simplistic explanation of both. how we approach this via PHQ-4. So in the psychological literature, they use a bunch of these screening tools. The PHQ-4 that we used is comprised of two questions from one called the Patient Health Questionnaire 9 or PHQ-9, which is a screening tool for depression, and the General Anxiety Disorder Questionnaire, which is GAD 12 or 7. I don't exactly remember, but what we do in our study is we use a very short version of this. The reason for that is mostly that people's attention spans dwindle a lot when you come into phone survey territory. So in the interest of keeping things short, we use this arguably tested tool and say that two questions are about depression and two questions are about anxiety. And in the two questions about anxiety, we have seen a 28% reduction, but overall on the entire score, we've seen about 16% of standard deviation reduction. I hope that answers.
Thank you for that again. And we have one more question from Anahita. I will just read it out unless you want to unmute yourself, Anahita. The question is, do you have a sense for what is driving the improvement in mental health outcomes? Do you think this has to mainly do with the fact that a human being is delivering the message as opposed to recording, in that it seems like someone checking in on you in uncertain times, or is there something else?
I think you should go for it.
Okay, and I thought you did catch the gist of it well. The idea is to do with the fact that a real person's delivering it. But I think more than someone checking in on you, I think it's to do with your reliability on the information and also catching your attention span. Like Varun said, since all of this was delivered over the phone, there was treatment arms, right? And if you think about something like the voice recording, people are less likely to be welcoming to it compared to somebody who's like taking the effort of calling you up and especially delivering a script about you. So I think it's hard to, like, this is all speculation again of like what could be the exact reason behind why they're more accepting of a real person giving you the information. But our thought process was that it could just be the idea of increased reliability, and maybe just like saying no to a real person is harder than like cutting the call over a voice recording directly. So it could be a mix of like a bunch of these reasons.
I have another question. Is there a gender component to this at all? Like, did you find that, like in most cases around the world for everything, did people listen to men more, or was it like, did you see any differences with gender components for this?
I can go again. So, Anusha, the reason we could not see a gender component to this was because it was a female voice in both the phone call and the voice recording. And we also went by the literature that women are more likely to be welcomed into like listening. They're more easy to listen to. Also, considering we were doing a pan, like across gender, like we did not exactly have a good division. Sorry, what I mean to say is that our sample was a good mix of both men and women. We couldn't have gone with a male voice and compared it because like women workers are less likely to be more welcoming towards a man speaking over a phone. So it was just in our best interest to go with like a female voice or a female enumerator providing this information.
Okay, I guess I have another question after listening to all these really interesting ones. I think that question on gender really made me think about the identity of the messenger, and also how the message could be localized and more contextualized. And like you also said, it was already in the local language. And I was wondering if the person who was delivering the message was known to the messenger. Was known to the person who the message was being delivered to. So was this someone who was absolutely unknown? And if in that case, do you think if there's someone from within the community, like someone the person already knows, and there's a level of familiarity with this person who's delivering that message, would that make the message more believable? And I'll also give context of where I'm coming from. We've seen in Bangladesh and other countries that when local leaders like imams, when they are sharing messages, we've seen cases of people who are more likely to believe that message as compared to maybe when the message is coming from somewhere else. Yeah, that was just to give you a little bit of context on where I was coming from.
Ayushi, can I just piggyback on your question and also add what about celebrities in this? Like, I think Varun mentioned Amitabh Bachchan. Does that make a difference?
Yeah, the funny thing is JPA has already done a study on it, and it's the most famous study of 2020 COVID pandemic, right? Where they used Abhijit Banerjee as the voice behind the person delivering the message. And it was a big hit, and it did show that people having either a good clue about who this person is or having a famous person deliver this message just makes the message more credible in some form or the other. But in our intervention, we did none of that. Our intervention specifically focused on understanding the different, a comparison of the different modes of providing this information. And our messenger or the enumerator who delivered the information was a complete stranger to our sample. I mean, to the point that they did not even take, I mean, even though they were an enumerator, we made sure that they did not even do any surveys for baseline, so that like the first time people heard her voice was during providing this information. So yeah, it's technically our study is not under the purview of giving concrete information about what happens when there is a relationship between the messenger and the messengee.
Okay, perhaps if we don't have any more questions, then we can close our discussion for today, but also hope to continue to engage with this issue over other platforms and in future. And thank you so much for everyone who has been able to join us today. And we would like to thank Sashwati and Varun as well for taking us through that really interesting study and a very crucial one as well. This has been a really engaging and a wonderful discussion, and with a lot of learnings as well. And I think that study that you cited, Sashwati, by JPAL, wherein Abhijit Banerjee was the one giving the messages, that's something that I am going to definitely read. That was really interesting too. Yeah, it's been a great conversation, and I hope there are no more questions. With that, I would like to wrap up the session. And thank you so much again, both of you. All right, thank you everyone. And just to kind of close the session, we also have a lot other plenaries, showcases and dialogues going on. And if you are more interested, you could also look at our website, which is www.corenet.in. And we're also updating our Twitter handle, which is @corenet_India. And all the real-time updates are going there. And you can also write to us at hello@corenet.in. And yeah, I think like Sashwati already mentioned, if there are more questions, thoughts, comments, maybe you can reach out directly to her. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you again to our speakers.